recent work explores the role of singing in civic engagement, deepening dialogue among potentially insular groups. Her work's been shown at a number of places, including Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, San Francisco Film Festival. She's done a number of residencies, one of which caught my eye, the Jurassic Resident Artist Program. A number of DRAP alumni have presented at Heroes Lasers. So, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thanks to you all for coming. We're going to change gears a little here. I am an interdisciplinary artist, so prepare yourselves. The title of my talk, Everyday Voices Building a Different Kind of Wall, is really in reference to my latest project, Wall of Song. But I wanted to, before I share about that, really talk more broadly about the role of song and the role of amateur and collective singing as it's developed in my practice. So singing together is fairly ancient and universal, and evolutionary musicologists now believe that the early hominids might have used collective rhythmic singing as a way to promote loyalty, bond the group together, and to send messages of organized and united resistance. And in fact, many studies underscore song's role as an evolved group process, so essentially our evolutionary reward for bringing the group together cooperatively. And apparently, archaeoacousticians, I wasn't aware that was a field until recently, have shown that the ancient hunters painted their cave dwellings most densely where singing sounded most resonant. So for example, here is a cave painting of a bison in the Salon Noir in France, in a location of the cave where it sounded much like a Romanesque chapel, apparently. So I've always been fascinated with song, but I should mention I'm not interested really in the masterful, polished, professional singing that we're more often used to, but really in the stumbling, raw vulnerability of everyday voices, amateur voices. And I come to song as an artist, and certainly not as a singer, or a musician, or a musicologist. And what really fascinates me about song is this idea there's a different kind of fluency in song. A fluency that kind of goes beyond or before the level of words. So this is an early video piece I made during the end of my MFA at Berkeley and finished during a Headland Center for the Arts residency in 2006. And it really shows an early example of amateur singing in my work.
I give to you, not as the world give him to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither and be afraid. Thy peace I give to you. Peace I give to you. Thank you to you.
He's a brave fellow indeed. He's a Marine veteran actually, and he was hooked up with a wireless mic while he climbed up and then rolled down this large hill toward the headlands. Really anything but peacefully while singing about peace. So as you can hear, sorry, I'm not sure how to turn it down here. As you can hear, his voice is straining and broken as he tries to sing, and it's really in sharp contrast with the noble sense.
And be afraid. My peace I give to you.
In another video work made shortly after this, a woman whistles the hymn, Great is Thy Faithfulness, and I layered the sounds of her whistling so that she's in and out of sync with herself, and paired it with footage of a tragic shipwreck I witnessed on the shores of Rodeo Beach during my residency at the Headlands as well. So this body of work unfolded into a series of collaborative video and sound works with artist Jean Finley and performance artist Pamela Z a number of years later. And this early video work installed at the Headlands Project Space features my husband and I, lucky guys in the audience, treading water with our hands in the air while we sing the hymn, How Great Thou Art. And so I have a
I see the stars, I hear the rolling thunder, thy power throughout the universe displayed. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee.
So I said amateur singing, right? So we keep
How
singing,
great
keep our
thou
hands in the
art.
air until we submerge in exhaustion. And it's really unclear if we're drowning or being baptized, holding our hands up for help or it's supplication. And I'm really interested in this gesture of ambivalence and really the way that it troubles the work and the language and maybe opens up the work to the viewer's own experiences of belief and making meaning of the work. So one of these early video works, Doxology, continues today as an evolving multi-channel installation piece, layering the voices and faces of my family, humming the hymn Doxology every decade. So first in 2005 as seen on the left, and then 2015 as on the right. So currently it's a 2-channel installation, but the ideas will continue to evolve. So essentially in 2025, it will be a 3-channel installation and so on. So each family member's hymn is basically filmed individually, and then I layer the voices on top of each other, so they build up to a crescendo. But here's a short clip. The sound is not the best in this room, so I'm going to cut that short. But it's that you can see the whole family here laid out Brady Bunch style. I'm lucky I'm the eldest of 9, so I have a pretty dissonant and harmonious chorus within my own family, and they're definitely all amateurs as well in terms of singing. And so this is us, 10 years ago, 10 years later, and of course I wonder how long I'll be able to create this work and how long my family members will be able to participate. And I anticipate that technology will change, as you can see already, and that my own growth as an artist will impact all the iterations to follow. Installation. So in these ways, my early video work was increasingly preoccupied with the ways, with how we perform or enact an ambivalent kind of searching and questioning through amateur and everyday singing, often under some kind of physical or durational strain. But why humming, whistling, or disturbing the clarity of the words? As I said, it's really the ambivalence or the uncertainty or troubling of these gestures that were and still are really important to me. And in 2004, when I made these works, it's not explicit, but they really were in response to the political events of the time, when it felt, as it still feels, like the language of belief was becoming increasingly co-opted and flattened as a moral cover for a violent agenda. And these pieces felt like a way for me to deepen and complicate that in some way and lay groundwork across typically more insular groups and ideas. So that was sort of the beginnings of my video practice with song. Another way to complicate or deepen fluency of song is with resonant spaces. So I don't know if you're aware, but there's these amazing tunnels in the headlands, in the Marin headlands. And it turns out there are these amazing reverberant spaces. And apparently the Buddhist monks chant back and forth in there in a call and response fashion, which really captivated me. And so I decided to do a piece there a few years later and essentially organized for 2 Episcopalian priests and 2 scientists to meet there in one of these tunnels and chant back and forth stories about believing and not believing. And the result of their chanting back and forth was really this almost palpable collision of reverberant and overlapping sound. So reverberant spaces are also of great interest to certain sound scientists, and I found this out during my residency at the Stanford Experimental Media Arts Lab a few years later. And apparently the scientists from the Computer Research Center for Music and Acoustics can actually create a sonic fingerprint, an acoustic signature of the sound space, and then apply that anywhere else. And they essentially do this by popping a balloon. And they can basically measure the acoustic response and then apply it somewhere else. So here's their setup at the church. So I got to take part in this balloon popping, and I found this spectacle to be really quite absurd and fascinating in itself. So around the same time as these experiments were going on, I was commissioned to do a community-based work for the inaugural opening of the New Palo Alto Art Center. So I collaborated on this work with another artist, Jean Finley, and together we worked with the folks at Karma to take seniors from a local nursing home on an acoustic journey from the community center's room to basically the more reverberant space of the Stanford Church down the road. And we did this by creating a live collaborative singing event where we sang songs together that they could remember from the 40s, like Let Me Call You Sweetheart, Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and so on. And while we were singing, our voices were transformed live with the help of the Karma scientists, like we were singing in the resonance space of the Stanford Memorial Church. So here's a short clip. So this piece led me to think really further about the idea of collective singing in our civic life. And, but then around then I started to realize that we really don't sing much together, especially in North America, aside from the occasional happy birthday. And so I wondered, what are we giving up exactly when we don't sing together? Well, singing is known to trigger a surge of neurochemical rewards, and like endorphins, which are bonding hormones and pain relievers. It lowers cortisol, a chemical triggered by stress, releases serotonin, a neurotransmitter associated with feelings of euphoria and contentment, and envelops us in dopamine, a neurotransmitter in the brain linked to contentment as well as alertness. And the good news is you don't really need to be a good singer to get all this. And so, in fact, they found that when we sing with others, these benefits are amplified and have been found to cultivate joint perspectives, cooperation, and a less egocentric mindset. So this graph is from a research paper I found where they actually measured the synchronization in breathing and heart rate in 5 different subjects during a mantra, and they found a similar, although more complex structure with hymn singing. So it turns out when we sing together, we not only breathe together, but our heart rates can become synchronized. And now I find this really fascinating because it seems like there is real potential in raising our voices together in song. And in fact, this powerful range of voices have now been dubbed, when we bring our voices together collectively, it's now been dubbed the choir effect. So here's a clip of over 300,000 Estonians singing in 1988 in an event that kickstarted what is now called the Baltic Singing Revolution. It has been said that Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians sang themselves to independence and freedom from brutal Soviet occupation from 1988 to 1991. I love that guy at the end. So they sang band, often traditional folk-style poem songs for 3 days in a field, songs that evolved out of a 150-year-old singing tradition. So in another pretty amazing event, about a year later, they organized for, well, over 2 million people literally joined hands in a human chain from the north to the south, spanning over 400 miles and across the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which were at the time considered to be republics of the Soviet Union. Excuse me, and this has become known as the Baltic Way or the Baltic Chain. In 1991, they achieved independence from the Soviet Union. And a participant and professor of the local Estonian university said, "We had no fear while we were singing." And of course, collective singing was also used in the civil rights movement to mobilize and charge the courage of people for the long marches and against ongoing harassment and brutality. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the freedom songs are playing a strong and vital role in our struggle. So here you can see a group of Freedom Summer volunteers singing "We Shall Overcome," which was one of the most famous songs, obviously, and really became the unofficial anthem of the movement. So just a cursory glance at a lot of, obviously, confluence of events that led to these, helped with each of these movements, but it really does seem like song plays a key role in bringing people together in a unified body of nonviolent resistance in a uniquely effective and very emotionally resonant way. Which is why my collaborator Michael Namkung and I are building Wall of Song, a mass singing of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. It's a very subtle image, so the lights are really showing up, but I'll explain more about this image in a moment. So on November 7th, a day before Trump won the election, during a time when there's been a talk of a lot of wall building going on in this country, Leonard Cohen passed away. And in response to these events, Michael and I decided to build a different kind of wall, a more permeable and resonant wall that would bring people together instead of dividing them through the relatively rare and powerful ritual of singing together. So we started rapidly prototyping with a very simple participatory website platform, wallofsongproject.com, and people from all different backgrounds, beliefs, political affiliations, countries of origins, and no matter their ability to carry a tune, it turns out it's very important to mention that point, are invited to record themselves singing along to Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. And then this collected footage is gathered together into a series of participatory video installations, which we share back to the community. So we launched our project at the San Jose Institute of Contemporary Art and in Washington, D.C. on Inauguration Day, just earlier this year. And we projected the installation on the side of a white building on Pennsylvania Avenue, 6 blocks south of the Capitol, and amplified, or really blasted, the voices off the rooftop into the neighborhood. So what you're seeing here are our first 100 faces or so layered together along with their voices. And then this is like a democratic chorus where no one voice or face stands out. So it's a little intimidating when you go and sing at first, but you don't really see any individual, and everyone sounds great when they sing together. So we were told by people coming out of the metro that they thought there was some kind of uprising above them, and people coming out of their homes thought that there were crowds chanting in the metro, and we were really overwhelmed by the emotional responses. And it seemed like sharing this work as a public performance in this way, in this time, in this place, obviously an emotional day, made space for people to connect in a different way, and there was a kind of public intimacy we hadn't experienced before in our work. So this is my collaborator Michael with an iPad strapped to his chest as we set out on the Women's March the next day with Wall of Song. Our video installation and live singing event continues to grow, and we've actually been exhibiting at many other venues. We've done the Hammer Theater at San Jose, with Robin Bell at the Trinidad Theater in DC. He's the guy who's projecting all those text-based pieces on Department of Justice and whatnot, as a participatory event at Southern Exposure, and as pictured here at Headland Center for the Arts. If you're not familiar with this area, these are the two large Army barracks. They're very large buildings, 4-story, and so it's a large-scale projection. And all these events really helped us gather voices and practice singing together in preparation for our largest event, which was a video installation and a live singing event at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco earlier this summer, which is really a special context for us with its rich history of social justice and support of the arts. So we coordinated with Yoga on the Labyrinth, and we're invited to lead the Ohms for 700 yogis just prior to our event. So the image on the left shows you what it looks like to have 700 yoga mats on the floor, which is quite a sight. And then after everyone rolled up their mats, many joined us in the doors, and we opened up the doors, and hundreds of others came in, which made for this really diverse and full-bodied group. And then the piece began playing on this 25-foot screen, which incidentally is hanging from a 100-foot ceiling, and we made that happen. It was quite an experience, and we all sang along with it, along with the hundreds of other voices singing that were already in the piece. So many participants told us that they were moved by this experience, and for me it was a real personal highlight. We just never had that context and that all those people so generously contribute their voices. And after we sang, the video installation continued to play, and people added their voices in the private nooks and crannies of the cathedral with the help of many volunteers. And you can now add your voice using our new app, developed with one of my colleagues, San Jose State University professor, Vidya Rangasi, and a team of her computer science students. Freely available on the App Store and Google Play. So here's a short clip. lot better. There's a lot of, sort of, you could see people's faces in and out if there's good light. So what is, you know, hearing here are hundreds of individually recorded voices of people singing behind their laptops in isolation, coming together with people there in the space that night. But in addition to the context, what you're singing matters to us as well, and it was important to us that the lyrics were open-ended and full of paradox. So here we are singing of a holy and a broken hallelujah, and you know, we wanted that to be open to different belief experiences. And of course, while it's definitely a challenge to find an appropriate song to sing collectively, it seems that many are familiar with this tune. So, a new project I'm now developing continues to explore my interest in mass singing, as I'm doing an experimental documentary and video installation drawing upon the boisterous and fraught alchemy of sports stadium singing. That's another talk. So to conclude, while I recognize that singing isn't some kind of cure-all, my goal is to help cultivate singing practices and rituals that help us to build and practice our voices for when we need them. To make space for what Quaker writer and activist Parker Palmer calls creative tension holding. So basically, in these divisive times, he says, instead of cynicism and despair, we can hold different and even opposing perspectives in tension, in creative tension. And singing together, it seems to me, particularly in certain times and certain places, is one potential way we can practice, as he puts it, standing in this tragic gap. Thank you.